Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this week's Real Talk. I am your host, Sister Zakia Sankar Jabbar, and as you know, we're here every Wednesday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And so, for everybody, just a few housekeeping. Make sure y'all hit the thumbs up button. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe. Also, make sure you share this broadcast. This is a really, really important broadcast, and this is something for me personally very important. Love, Black love, and I'm excited to be joined by Adrian and Ayalinda Mack. They are the founders of the Black Family Blueprint. Have y'all heard of it? Because I was mad I hadn't heard of it. Oh my goodness, like it's amazing. So like we're listening to some experts tonight. So I'm just gonna be quiet and allow Adrian and Yolanda to introduce themselves and share a little bit more about their background. Welcome, you two. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And we so appreciate this platform and the opportunity to come and spend some time in this conversation with you about Black love, Black power, Black politics, all Black everything, all day, every day. My name is Ayolanda Mack, and I am the co-founder along with my husband of Black Family Blueprint. And we really exist to find strategies and solutions for Black families, by Black families, about Black families, really for the longevity of the longevity and the health and wellness of the Black family unit and Black family systems.
And again, I'm Adrian Mack. I'm her other half. I'm the weaker half. She's the better half. And we together, we decided to create a company that really focused on our struggle, our need. As a couple who was moving into familyhood, making a blended family as well too, we had a lot of struggles. Still going through a lot of process of just figuring out how do we make a healthy family exist? How do we build healthy relationships? And so we've come from the background of doing youth work, but we realize in the process of working with youth, we have to impact the family and impact the family in so many ways. And so both of us finished our degrees in family studies. And in the process of looking at family studies, we looked at our relationship and looked at the constant mountains that we was going through in terms of building strong love and a healthy relationship and intimacy. And we said, what do we need in order to be right, in order to be a healthy Black man and a healthy Black woman loving each other? And we reached out to community and said, we got to bring the community in on this process. And so in the making of doing what we're doing, we said as an essential component of building a healthy Black family is making sure that the couples, there's a deep healing love between the couples that's spearheading the family. And so if we're not healthy, if we're not functioning, then the family won't have that predication. And so we started 6 years ago, this movement around looking and investigating Black love. And it's informed us on how we have connection with ourselves. We've went to the research and wanted to study this thing. And then we also went to community and said we have to have conversations. And in that process, we've been able to not only hone in lectures and workshops and literature to help support Black families, but we also put an emphasis on the maintenance and well-being of Black couples and how we can support them to be the anchor of Black families.
Wait, listen, this is the antidote to a lot of ills, quite frankly, in our community. And I'm sure you two know that. Welcome to the listeners again. If you're just coming in, again, just a few housekeeping, hit the thumbs up. Make sure you share this broadcast. We really want this to be interactive. We want to see you all commenting. For those of you listening right now, drop your city and state. Let us know where you're listening from, and also hit the share button. So, Adrian and Ayalinda, I guess my first question is, and I appreciate you all, giving some background, is how have your work thus far? How has it been received by couples or just single people? How has it been received, and have you all been able to, I guess, document any kind of success, if you will, in terms of the work that you all are embarking on.
Mm.
Thank you. No, it's been received really well. COVID has thwarted our efforts, of course, but we have a workshop called the Intimacy of Blackness that really focuses on the history of romantic relationships, starting from the first Africans that were brought over here as enslaved peoples, and really looking at what patterns of intimacy looked like then and how that really informs and impacts us now. And so we look at how the trauma has really impacted us coming together. How does trauma impact? This is why we focus. Let me take a step back. We focus on Black intimacy. We say that Black love is a look, like it looks good. We see Black love, we get excited, but Black intimacy is the function of Black love. And so we have this workshop called the Intimacy of Blackness to look at how do we overcome barriers to intimacy. So couples who have taken this Intimacy of Blackness workshop, which is like a really intensive 2-day workshop that goes through all the peoplehood history and then all the individual history, and then looks at patterns of trauma that we've lived through, patterns of intimacy. How do we see our parents love or not love? Like, what is it that we're bringing into these relationships? The feedback has been amazing. We've gotten so much great feedback. People want more. We did this specifically with couples who have had longevity together, who've been together for at least 2 years, who have that history. We're seeing that there's a need to work with younger couples, younger in age and also younger in terms of how long they've been together. But we just, even still, when we, see people in the community, they tell us how impactful it has been, because it's allowed them to see how they connect. How do you connect? How are you able to be vulnerable with your partner or not? And if not, what are those barriers to that vulnerability, and how do you overcome them? How do you put rituals in place between you and your loved one to help you begin to really build that intimacy? Because it's the intimacy that builds longevity in our relationships.
And so the community is also responded with just recognizing that there's a necessity for this. And there's a needed process for normalization. That, we know that when it comes to building deep connections between couples, we have to, it's needed. And like you said earlier, opening this thing up, this is an essential component. It's necessity for us to even talk about family and community and even politics and economics of our peoplehood if we're not bringing it back down to the very fiber that roots us in our peoplehood. And that's two people being able to love on each other. And of course, we can go into the children and the wealth, but specifically looking at two people who can say, look, I'm in love with you and I adore your history and I adore your experience. And we are from the same peoplehood, uniqueness and experience. We have the same connection collectively like that. Without that piece, we know it's necessity. But they also talked about, the community said that it was good to be in space with other Black couples, because now I feel like what we're going through is not something that's just us. Now I realize that we normalized the process, but it gave them inspiration and hope. Like, wow, this conversation is needed. I needed to be in a space where other Black men is experiencing this, other Black women are experiencing this, and we can have conversations and we can really be a part of a process where we have some things on the table to investigate and to work on. And so the community has responded and told us, like, we have to do this work around Black love and Black intimacy, because without this, the very cells of our body as a people is going to disintegrate.
I really appreciate that. And I think what I love the most, I shouldn't say the most, well, what really struck me, I would say, and I appreciate, is that you all started with the history, right? You all connect the fact that repression and oppression has contributed greatly to what we see in the community, as far as all of the disunity, all of the dysfunction, and all of the things, that has really broken Black love apart, and I think is really interesting, because it kind of gets political, and you have people who are more liberal, if you
Hmm.
will say things like, because people have rightly pointed out, that our community and the children are growing up in single-headed households,
Hmm.
and how that number is much higher than it was even in the 60s, like
Hmm.
where you would think like, okay, that was like way more overt oppression and
Hmm.
repression, but we were still able to at least keep our families together.
Hmm.
And generally, you'll hear that like from conservatives who are like saying like, oh, the root of everything is just the Black family, which obviously is not truth, but there's
Hmm.
some truth to it. Honestly, there's
Yes.
usually some truth to even some of the things that they say. And for me, I think, when I think about Black love, and I'm married, we're also in a blended family as well. I can just tell you, without having the kind of tools that you all are providing, it's an uphill battle, because
Ooh.
you're dealing with exes, you're dealing with, sometimes your
Mhm.
children may not be, you know what I mean?
And
Yeah.
Tim
It's
said nothing but a word. We
talk
know.
about it. No, lean into that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that is what our work around Intimacy of Blackness was born out of our struggle.
Hmm.
And we
Right.
found ourselves, we've been together for 20 years.
Hmm.
Over the years,
Wow.
we found ourselves having to create tools for ourselves
Hmm.
to get through. We've
Hmm.
tried the therapy route a few times. We've tried sitting down and talking to other couples a few times. And what we found is that those things help. And you also need other things. But
Right.
most foundationally, you have to have an understanding of your womanhood and your
Your manhood.
manhood.
Hmm.
You have to understand your ideas of gender. What are you bringing in? Like, we have to
Mm.
understand what baggage we're bringing in, what
Hmm.
we're presenting our mate with,
Hmm.
in order to be able to get from point A to point B.
Hmm.
And so that so we've been through it, the exes, the baby mamas, the
Hmm.
blended family, trying to make it work, trying to keep it tight and right. And it's not easy.
Right.
And so all of that experience plus the research is what has really built Intimacy of Blackness into what it is.
And some of the pieces that you talked about is important, because we know how liberals and conservatives has used certain messages and certain angles to try to define and kind of describe the Black family piece. In more recent times, some of this research kind of and how it's political goes back to Daniel Moynihan's piece
Right.
on the Black family, and that
Right.
report that came out from that commission. And it's interesting because he was advised by a lot of Black scholarship in his research to coming up with this piece and this whole trope around the matriarchal structure of the Black family, and how it's, describing the interesting things that there's fallacies to that report. And there's a lot of, this is my field. There's a lot of fallacies. Herbert Goodman, John Blessingame. There's numerous scholars who challenged the very foundations of some of that research, and saying, "Yo, I don't know if it's exactly the way he described it, but like you said, there is some evidence to say that there was a disintegration or a restructuring of the family piece." But one thing they couldn't get into is the quality and the connection of Black marriages at that time, nor could they describe the connection between affection between Black men and Black women. It didn't show up in that report. And
Wow.
one of the things that we have to get into understanding, especially in doing that work, is that in order for us to deeply have a healing connection between how we do love with each other, we have to know a little bit about our family, our grandparents, our great grandparents, and put Black connection and intimacy into context. Without that context, it's going to be difficult for us to be able to reflect and process what we're bringing to a relationship. And so what we offer is not therapy. We're not therapists. We offer what we call couples relationship enrichment programs. And most CREs are based on biblical texts. They're based on, some of them are Islamic texts. Brother Nuri on the Nation of Islam is doing a powerful piece within the nation on really building some material around investigating how we can build healthy relationships. But most CREs are religious in nature.
Right.
We want to focus on the historical realities of Black folks and look at how the system has done an intentional process of dismantling the relationship between Black men and Black
It's
women.
undeniable.
Exactly. This goes back to some of the first legislations that was put in law in Virginia in 1642. That
Break it down.
in 1642, the Virginia Assembly created a tithable process on Black women that says that any Black woman who was any African woman that was in the colonies was going to be taxed and her labor, which created complications of any Black man who was either free or enslaved to even marry, because if he wanted to be in a relationship with her, he would have to pay taxes on her because the colony needed to make money on every working person. White women was exhumed from that process. You didn't have to pay taxes on a white woman to be a resident in Virginia, but on every African woman that was here, you had to pay a price on her. That was some of the first systems that was put in place.
Oh my God. I have never heard of that. In all of the Black studies that I have read and all of the reading that I continue to do, even from a lot of our African warrior scholars, I've never read that anywhere.
Yes.
Wow.
And then you find numerous systems like that, policies like that, that has made it very complicated for Black men and Black women to find ways to do it. One of the things that Sister Dr. Tara Hunter introduces to us is that in the conversation of marriage and love for African descendants in this country, there was always a third body concept. There was always a third body, which meant that a white man or a white woman had an influence or control on how you was able to engage in the proximity of your marriage. So master always approved whether or not you was going to marry this person.
And it wasn't even a real marriage.
It wasn't even a real marriage.
Because you cannot have enslavement and marriage, because to be married is to have rights. It's to have citizenship rights. So the marriages weren't even real marriages. Even, it's in some text that the marriage was just to keep morale high, really. Like we'll say you can do this just to keep your morale high, but there's not even an instance of a real marriage until after the Emancipation Proclamation.
And so and when you're looking at, and even when you're talking about the complications of one, let's say of a enslaved woman being owned by one master and the man is owned by another master, there was complications on how they was able to be in conjugation with each other, because they had to confer to both masters if they can see each other, let alone to be married with each other, let alone to be in proximity with each other. And so there was always this third body that was either facilitating or controlling the way we got involved with each other. And especially after 1808, when the Second Middle Passage came into existence, and then the domestication of the slave trade and the closing down of the so-called imported slaves from Africa, it created this forced reproductive system on plantations that oftentimes slave owners forced Black men or forced Black women to be in sexual relationships with people that they wasn't affectionately in love with.
That's the thing about love, about Black love, that I think is extremely important to uplift. In that Black women and Black men did not necessarily have control over who they were going to lay down with. They didn't have any control over who they had to live with. They didn't have any control. We didn't have any control over who we were going to have children with. But we did have control over who we loved. And that is the person that we kept deeply in our heart. But because of the structure of enslavement, it did not allow us to always live that out. So then marriages, slave marriages, became a matter of companionship. But also this idea of love was a little different, because you know that you're in companionship with someone whose existence is not permanent. Not that there may be death, but that they could be death. They could be sold off. There's so many different, there's such a variety of factors that made our love and our coupling really transient in nature in our process of.
So there's a sister that got a book called Till Death or Distance Do Us Part. Her name is Frances Foster Smith. It's in here somewhere, right here. And this sister breaks it down. Can you grab this? Grab that check.
Yeah.
She talks about the complications of even falling in love and even being willing to fall in love, where there's a lot of our ancestors chose not to be deeply involved because they didn't know when that person may be auctioned off, sent down the road. And even though in that process, we still strive for some resilience of love and affection, there was always this piece of like, I'm not going to get too close. I'm not going to. And so some of us settle for just having sweethearts on the plantation and in the plantation quarters. Or some of us, what was the phrase that Dr. Hunter used? Taking up. Yeah. We're just taking up. Yeah, we're just taking up somebody. It's another words of saying just.
Man, my great grandmother and them used that language. Wow. Taking up. Yeah.
Just taking up. Yes. And it's like, it's a level of like, we living together and we trying to do something, but ain't no ring on this. I'm not trying to. And I'm not going to get too emotionally involved. And so what we're doing is we're trying to, and we can go deeper into this, but we're trying to create the ramification that there's a socio-political context to what impacted Africanness of finding love in this country. It wasn't designed for us to find love. Exactly. It wasn't designed. And there was a lot of systemic processes that forced our kind of conjugal connections. And it didn't make room for us to even recognize affection and a love and intimacy with each other. And so it wasn't designed that day. We was brought here just for labor.
And love was what they call a northern ideal. Mm-hmm. For Black folks, marriage has always been rooted in our survival. Yep. After so-called freedom, in the process of Reconstruction, there was this huge push to get Black folks who were taken up with each other to actually get married. Mm-hmm. Now, there was more taxes then that they owed to wherever it was that they were living with being married. There were other fees that had to be paid. But the big piece around this is that when you are married, you are able to produce more labor, which in fact is going to become
more wealth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Black marriage during Reconstruction became a commodity to build capitalism. And Black people were really strongly encouraged and urged to get married. And so anyone living on a plantation, still sharecropping, or even if they had their own land, owning their own work, the setup was not a good setup for anyone to be able to do it alone. And so then here we have Black marriage was really around a matter of our survival. Yeah. And on the other end, to continue to build the capital in this country.
And so there was this relationship between the working land owning class and Black families. Black men were able to get some employment in that sharecropping system. But if you had a family and had children, you was able to kind of get a contract and be able to work the lands a lot more quicker because, again, it was more labor force on the piece. But it bestowed power and influence onto the man in that situation, which we already know how corrupt and economically disadvantaged Black men and Black families were in that sharecropping system. So it put a lot of toll on the family for even to be able to create dynamics of health and well-being. And so that economic toll was, as we know, is a second form of slavery, really impacted and almost destroyed most families. But even in the midst of these social deprivations that we was experiencing, Black men and Black women were still running to different ports when the Union was occupying the area and said, I want to marry this person, marry us. In 1862, in I can't remember what part of Virginia that was. It was known at the time as Fort Monroe, Fort Freedom. You had missionaries and different people who was commissioned to be in these camps that was occupied by the Union.
Going around the neighborhood marrying people.
Yeah. And it was literally like Black folks was showing up on these Union lines in these spaces, in these camps, refugees camps, and just saying, yo, this is my wife. I want you to marry us. And so marriage soared to some extent in that Reconstruction era. But the complications of being able to establish themselves economically and politically when there wasn't even, we wasn't even fully citizens yet, was still the dynamic that we had to unravel. And so all of this deeply impacted how a Black man and a Black woman was able to build strong bonds with each other. Some of them still had existing situations from the plantation system. And of course, these things have a psychological toll on us that eventually showed up in our relationships.
But wait, because that was like pre-Emancipation Proclamation,
Mm-hmm.
but after freedom, their white male patriarchy was handed to Black men.
Mm.
The structure of white male patriarchy was handed to Black men, and so that
in the structure, not economically.
We know not economically.
And so that's a huge thing to take into account, because it was during that period of Reconstruction, when this white male patriarchy was handed to Black men, that then Black women, where women in general still didn't have rights,
mm-hmm.
then there was this power and authority dynamic then that existed, and this level of the burden of responsibility that existed with Black men
mm-hmm.
in these marriages. And so you did start to see, there was still a boom of marriage, but marriage became more complicated during the Emancipation Proclamation. We still continue to get married, but it did become complicated, with men having to be the landowners then, or men securing the contracts for the sharecropping, and men mm-hmm. being responsible for the labor of the household. So there are many letters and narratives of that time where the Black men are writing in like, my wife got, basically she got smart with the landowner. Now we got to move to a different place. She won't listen to me. I'm telling her,
mm-hmm.
She need to stop, because this is our livelihood, and so there was this burden of responsibility that men had that was different from just being a husband and being in love with someone, or sharing that level of intimacy and that bond. But it was like, my wife is not really just my wife. She's also kind of my property, and I'm fully responsible for her right now. And so again, here's that nuance that we see, and we still see gender role stuff, challenges in our marriages, in our relationships today, but it's absolutely an extension from what white male patriarchy handed to us.
Yeah. And for the most part, damaged us with. And so again, we can unravel the heavy psychosocial impact that white supremacy and the structure of this thing and these social systems has done to the developing process of Black men and Black women in this country, and deeply impacted not only our family making process, but our ability to love. And so what we inherit from generation to generation are these negative cyclical patterns of how we understand not only the efficacy of our manhood and womanhood, but the ability to be able to relate and find affection with someone else and be able to build that up. And so, of course, we can go into these deeper psychological dimensions of how trauma and psychological trauma pass through families, but that's what it is. And essentially, when we're looking at how these negative patterns kind of constitute how we build relationships, how we find security and being loved and giving love, then we can see how these things kind of shape how we relate to that man or relate to that woman, and it impacts what we do with our children. And so, it's the system is always the derivative of how it's damaged us and really created some some painful things in our memories. But it's interesting how these things show up with us, in our patterns of finding love and relationship, but also show up in our bodies as well too. Because there's certain things in terms of racism that exist in our bodies that shows up in our relationships.
You better say that. Yeah. Man. Listen, man, this is amazing. Like I'm literally here so quiet because history is contemporary, man. Like I'm listening to you all like really break this down from a historical perspective. And in my mind, I'm connecting it to like so much shit that's happening today.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, and I'm just like, people have no idea how important history is, and not just how important it is, but how it literally informs everything that's still happening. And y'all better share this. We talking about Black love, man. If y'all listening to this broadcast right now, man, share this and tell people it's really important. If you Black, Black folks, y'all really need to share this. We need way more views than what's happening here. I know it's not controversial and it's not about trash. Sometimes people be gravitated toward that, but for those of us who are serious about Black liberation, generally Black love is definitely um, uh, a part of that. But I'm sorry I cut you all off. But
No, you're good.
No.
there's a quick question because I brought up you all's website because I think the website number one is just done very well, and I spent a lot of time on your website, and I wanted you all to talk a little bit about Black Safe. That to me, like kind of pulled me in a little bit, and I knew I wanted you all to talk about that. So I want you all to like kind of finish the conversation about the history, but just wanted to point you there that was something that I really wanted you all to hone in on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and with Black Safe, we have two children together. 10 years, excuse me, they're 11 and 8 now. Yeah. Kanandi and Andwele, they are watching, and so they're texting me like, "Can you shout us out?"
Beautiful names.
So hello, Kanandi and Andwele.
So beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, they're like, this is so cool. So I'm gonna pull them in. But the Black Safe, the secure attachment for empowerment, it really again goes back to our historical narrative and our ability to connect with our children. We have intimate relationships with our children too, not romantic, but it's a close relationship. And we know that what we have been through and what we go through, this consistent systemic oppression, we know that that has a direct impact with the ways in which we interact with our children, the way we talk to them, the way we think about them, and the way that we connect with them. And so this Black Safe is all about finding strategies to continue to really be able to connect with our children and to get over some of the barriers of what I call plantation parenting. To be able to truly connect with our children. And we talk about things like discipline, some hot topics within Black families that could really break up Black families. But we have to talk about how to make sure that our children are inheriting health and wellness and not the trauma that has continued to be passed down from generation to generation. Our local and international healer and therapist, trauma therapist, Resma Minikim, he wrote this book, My Grandmother's Hands. We have both been personally trained by Resma, and he talks about trauma passed from generation to generation looks like culture. And so
epigenetics.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so that is one of the things that we talk about in Black Safe is how, like, beating our children, beat our kids, how that looks like culture, but it's really that trauma that's been passed down from generation to generation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we probably you got folks in the comments. They're getting active now.
You know what? Let me speak to that plantation parenting piece because that's
please.
I'm glad my wife highlighted that. That's actually from Dr. Joy DeGruy, and I think her literature does a really good job of making the connections of the transcendental trauma that comes down from plantation and making that argument of the theory that we are still deeply impacted by the system of slavery and how it impacts the psychological makeup of who we are, how it shows up in our family making process, as well as our love making process. Naeem Akbar, in his book, Psychological Chains and Images of Slavery, also introduced that back in 1994. And he talked about some of these tropes and imagery that still exists in our manhood patterns and the making of our manhood and womanhood. So these theories have been explored for a while. But I really love how Sean Ginwright, out of California, I can't remember.
Yeah, I've met him.
You met him? Yeah, he's powerful. And he talked about this concept. Yeah, he says there's nothing about post-traumatic slave disorder. Yeah. And his concept is that he extends her work by saying we live in a persistent traumatic something environment. What's it? Persistent something trauma environment. So he's basically saying
it's true
that we live under right now is reactivating the same nervous responses that our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents experienced under slavery. So if we do understand now with modern research that we are still living some of the pains of our ancestors who had to experience the harsh, violent manifestation of white supremacy in the form of slavery and sharecropping, lynching and rapings, then our nervous system unconsciously and subconsciously is still revealing some of those things every time we have to interact with a white teacher who gives us that certain look. Every time we have to deal with a white police officer when they come approach us from the back of our car. Every single time we are activated in certain situations, our nervous system is responding in the same way that our ancestors had it imprinted upon them. And so that's why our theory, especially around Black intimacy, is that you're not just loving and building relationships for you and her at that moment, or you and him at that moment. You're rekindling and healing a love that existed, that was violently impacted in the bodies of your ancestors 2, 3, 4 generations ago. So you're not just loving for you today, you're loving for people who couldn't love 4 generations ago, and you're also loving for those who are coming after you in the next 2 to 3 generations. So we have to get this right in Black intimacy right now, because not only is our people and our next generation going to be surviving off of the healing pieces that we do together, but we have to break some of these psychological images and traumatic repressions that exist in our bodies right now. We have to continue to undo those processes that our ancestors had to go through in this country. So we're healing in the process of loving at the same time.
And really in loving on our children too. Like, a lot of us parent out of fear. And again, back to how we feel it in our bodies. Sometimes that flash comes so quick. Like when your child talk back to you a little too hard and you're like, wait a minute, hold up. Like this
talk about it.
Yeah.
Like it happens so fast. But when you break it down, oftentimes it boils down to fear. The same fear that our parents had. If we were to get out of line or speak out of turn in the face, in the midst of a white face, and how that could be detrimental to our child's life, or to the lives in our family. And so it all boils down to that. Like, how do we slow down our responses a little bit with our partners, when we're quick to anger, or with our children, when we're quick to anger, to get to that layer that's just beneath the surface? It's a little bit deeper than I'm just mad all the time, or I can't stand these kids, or he get on my nerves. It's deeper than that. And so it's really about digging down into what it looks like and where did that come from? Why are we holding this in our bodies?
That's so real. I want to bring it up to contemporary, because I'm sure you all see, see the stuff that I see. And, in this, in this era of social media, I see a lot of disheartening things. And I want to bring your attention to, and you all may be familiar with this as well, but particularly on Twitter, it's really, really bad. There's something actually called Divest Twitter, where there are Black women, Black feminists, whatever. Brother Omawali, actually, who's watching with us, he actually wrote about this. But there are Black women who are saying they're divesting from Black men, and like they're opening up their choices, and they looking at white men and all kind of other men. And, part of me, listening to you all, clearly it's in the interest at this time, whereas it was in the interest of them before, our enemy, our oppressors, to want us to be married. And you all walked through that historically, but clearly now, and I would say, some decades back, it's in the interest of these people for us to be continuously at odds with each other, and literally, harming each other and hating each other. And so I just would love to hear sort of your thoughts on that, particularly when we look at the divorce rates in our community, when we look at the fact that, a lot of us aren't even attempting marriage. And then, with each other. I'm not even talking about like interracial marriage at this point. We can go there if y'all want to, but, I would love to just hear sort of your thoughts on this new divest piece.
Ooh, there's so many layers to unpack with that. One thing that I want to be clear about, though, is why we promote Black intimacy beyond just being married to one another, is that there is something in my husband's nervous system, and there is something in my nervous system that can only be healed by one another. When you bring a black body in, or when you bring another body on it.
Let's say a white body.
When you bring a white body, it's not just white though.
Yeah,
White body, Asian body.
Yes, yeah.
You know, when you bring these different people in there, it does not activate the nervous system in the same way. And so the healing that needs to be done, that generational healing that we're talking about, it becomes stifled. And then we have to hope that maybe the next generation is able to rectify that. So that's one thing that I want to mention. But I think that we have a collective low self-esteem as a people. It's a collective low self-esteem. And we see, this ain't no shade on nobody, but we see what Black women look like today. We see what women in even on social media, we see what Black women in social media look like. And they have everything but the skin of a white woman. So that low self-esteem that is carried, and I think
Naeem Akbar touched on that too.
Mm-hmm.
You can speak on the men, but there's this collective low self-esteem. But I think there's also this piece where we know that there's some work under our layers that we don't want to do, and so when we go this way or that way, we don't have to tap into those pieces of us that need to be healed. We can kind of continue to skirt along and not dig into the healing and the wellness that needs to happen. That can only happen with someone who has this same history as you.
Mm-hmm. And there's always going to be another layer to look at. Is there's always going to be these complicated pieces of how ideologies and specific messages are influencing the way we perceive each other and be wanting to be invest and be involved with each other. And one of the, I think you mentioned that earlier, is how feminism has played a role in really creating some divesting processes and thinking and imagery with how Black men,
100%,
Black women,
100%.
And so I think we're seeing some really complicated pieces of how academia has moved into pop culture. Pop culture has been influenced by these thoughts and these isms and these concepts that comes from feminist theory, and it's creating some complications of how Black women can actually have an honest, really real contextual perception of how they see Black men. And then and all of that has fueled some of this conversation and discourse around economic availability of Black women over Black men and whether Black men are available enough. And then when you throw in these crazy, I'm gonna call them agents or something. I don't know. I don't want to use those agents, operatives. But you got these like really diluted perspectives that come from people like Kevin Samuels and Derek Jackson.
You know, I was gonna ask y'all about him.
And then when you throw in people like the comedian who tried to speak on the topic, you know, bald head, thick mustache, Steve Harvey.
Oh, Steve Harvey.
And his book.
Yeah.
It's like we really, I know a lot of us have opinions. I know a lot of us believe we're doing some research around these things, but sometimes when we think we're helping, we're not actually helping. Right. And sometimes we're fueling a divisive discourse between Black men and Black women that's not leading to a goal of healing and unified intimacy between each other. And that's one of the things that came up with your interview with Sister Niara Scott, is that she's saying if you're not helping the situation, if your goal in what you're doing is not bringing Black men and Black women to a healthy self-perception with each other, to bring relationship and create the foundation for Black love, then you're hurting the situation. And that's echoed from Charles Hamilton Houston. He said either you're a social engineer or you're a parasite on society and on our peoplehood. And that's the critical piece to this, is that most of them thinking that they're social engineering these new thoughts around what a high value man is and high value woman. And this,
so sick of
it's some crazy mess. Derek Jackson thought he was really helping brothers out by chastising us for so long until some stuff blew up in his face. But you wasn't helping the situation.
You was lying the whole time.
On our people. You was a parasite on our thinking. Yes. You did not have nothing backed up in research. You didn't have no foundational principles on what you were standing on. And from a collective position, you did not have our people in mind when you was offering your ideas on what it means to build relationships and health with it. And so I think this divesting that's coming out is just another third body in the form of ideology that's still playing a role in litigating and facilitating how we build relationships. And this is an ideological level. We can go into child support and how child support systemically has been crippling us. There's many different systemic forms, but we can also look at how ideology and pop culture plays a role in that too. So this diverse Twitter thing, whatever that is, I've seen a little bit about it. I think it just stems from
terrible, y'all. It's terrible. It's depressing to me. Like I have to take breaks from Twitter.
But see, that again, that is the white male patriarchy, white female feminism that many of us have adopted. We've bought into this idea, and it does continue to dismantle our families. And we have to understand that neither of those things work well for white folks either.
Yep.
They don't work well for white people. They don't got the best marriage outcomes. They're not staying married till death do them part. Like that's not happening with them either. And so surely it ain't gonna help us. It's not gonna do anything for us. And that's why we stay rooted in what we need. And we cannot do the work that we need to do if it's not rooted in our peoplehood and who we are, where we come from, and what we've been through.
Yeah, man, this is really good. I do actually want you to lean in a little bit on the systemic pieces, and you brought up child support. Let me back up because and it's probably a similar answer. One of the things that I'm also seeing now, with a much more smaller segment of Black men, is this their own kind of like movement, if you will, around they're not using divestment, but I see from particular voices, and I won't say any names here, that, and this is outside of like Kevin Samuels, that are really anti-Black women. And it's really concerning because I see it picking up. I see it, it's really concerning because I see it now on both ends, and I'm just like, this will not have a good outcome. It just will not have a good outcome. So I don't know. But I think it is, to your point, Adrian. It's around pop culture, and also ideology, and it's almost like it's a response to what I'm talking about that I've seen, in recent years from Black women. In fact, even white women haven't done this. There was a hashtag a couple of years ago, literally called "Black Men Are Trash." I mean, thousands of tweets. Now, granted, I believe, and obviously I have no proof of this, I just use history as a barometer. I believe that some of that stuff is not all us. I think that there's some COINTELPRO shit going on too. Like that's not all of us, because like when you interact with Black people in like person, or like you like family or just people that like outside of social media, that is not the total reality. You know what I mean? It just isn't. But anyway, if you have any reflections on that, but I also do want you to lean in on some of those systemic issues, child support and others.
I think this movement, and I heard you. I heard what's the brother that you had on a few weeks ago that talked about manospheres. Can't think of that brother name.
He talked manospheres.
Yeah, he didn't talk about it, but he mentioned it, that this movement of men kind of.
That was the brother from Jamaica. Yeah. I lost his name, but yeah, I know you're talking about.
Yeah, and he and I like he elevated that in social media, in the world of social media and popular kind of media platforms. There's usually this response that kind of goes back and forth. It's almost like a subconscious dialogue where you see one trend happen and it automatically produces an inert response to that trend. And I'm not entirely sure if everything is directly correlated like that, but I know that historically, at least for the last 2 generations, there's been complications with Black men, just a little bit, that Black men are more likely to marry or to move and to be involved with women outside of Black womanhood. They're more likely to connect. And it's not to say that all Black men do that or subscribe to this notion, but statistically, we see that a little bit more.
That Black men were more likely than Black women
to marry
exactly. Outside of the race.
Exactly.
Right.
And so I think there's this tendency there, and it's a very small propensity, because it's still not statistically sound to be able to see this, but I think there may be some reflection in that with the way we, the way Black men interpret and even understand what does a real powerful, influential, and gorgeous and even attractive Black woman look like. And a lot of this stems from some of the work that we talk about in terms of understanding ourselves. Like, Black men have a very distorted concept of what masculinity and manhood look like, let alone having a perception of what femininity and African womanhood look like, or Black womanhood in America. And so I think, there's this piece, and I think it relates to what you just said, Sister Ayo, is that there's a concept of being kind of afraid to engage into the process that shapes and challenges us on our own unique experience as manhood. Because a Black woman is going to do that. She's going to have some standard or some idea of, like, as a Black man, this is what you should be about. This is what I'm expecting from you. And there's some brothers who don't want to engage with that. There's some brothers who are kind of appalled with that process, and they're quicker to be able to say, I'm going to date outside of that because I don't want to deal with that. A lot of it also, relates to that internalization process of what whiteness has done to us too, because it does not help us see Black womanhood in a healthy light. And so if there's a small nucleus of that, I feel like there's some kind of like the psychosocial connection of how our own definition of manhood has kind of created this room for us to not even look at Black womanhood in a way to even consider that this is viable and necessity for us in order to have a stronger collectivehood in our peoplehood.
That's interesting you say. Really quickly, I was going to say, that's interesting you say that, Brother Adrian, because some of the things that I hear from this particular group of brothers is that Black women are difficult. Black women, speaking about, like, the brothers you talking about marrying and dating outside of the race. We've been seeing that, at least for me, for a minute. And I feel like, we see it with high profile figures and things like that. People who are in the media and stuff like that. You're right, it's much more like, although I'm starting to see a lot more sisters with white men, like recently. Yeah. It's really grown like shit a lot. But anyway, I see brothers say things that Black women are difficult to deal with and that we are masculine. That's so I don't know, like, if you have a quick reflection on that, but those are like the two things that I hear the most from brothers who are married to women that are not Black.
You got a piece on that. Yeah.
So first we have to understand that Black men and Black women are both victims to racism, and this delusion of white supremacy has worked a number on us. And in that number that it has worked on us, it is also pit us against each other to blame one another. I know we're like in this cancel culture right now where we're canceling Black men like crazy. Black women kind of get canceled, but for other stuff, but we just like canceling Black men, and Black men are also victims of racism and white supremacy, just like Black women are. So that's one piece that I wanted to add to that. And then there's a whole bunch of pieces around salary and how much women are making, and ousting the father from the home. And I know this goes more into the conversation around policy, but there is this idea that women are financially doing better than Black men in certain cases. And women feel like they want to go in another direction and not date a Black man or marry a Black man because he can't take care of her financially. And there's some systemic pieces around that. So I wanted to mention that piece real quick.
I think there's some struggles with that because this whole masculine Black woman thing, I see the reason why I don't buy into accepting that definition alone is because I put Black women and Black men into historical context. that's important. And without understanding, especially and specifically what happened to us in the last two generations, you won't understand what this natural focal thing has done to the developing femininity of Black women in our communities. And so I think um, there has been processes within systems that have kind of constructed the arrangement with families to where it looks like, and there's a lot more economic support for this single Black woman household, and men not being in a household. And that was carefully crafted and constructed in a way where
Absolutely.
yeah, that it completely disintegrated the fabric of how Black men and Black women can relate to building up children, child, parenthood. And I think the consequences to that is this psychosocial damage that is done to what we build in Black men and what we build in Black womanhood. And so, without that lens, it's easy to sit up here and say, well, Black women are just too masculine. They're too hard for me. But
who defines that? Like, that's the question. Who gets to define what femininity looks like? It's the image of this delicate white woman on a plantation who does not have to do no work, who don't really have to care for her family. That's part of the issue, is who's defining masculinity and who's defining femininity. And we know that this idea of what a nuclear family looks like in America for white people is not really what it really looks like for us, for women who do have to work, for women who maybe might be the matriarchs of their family, for women who might work in partnership with their husbands to make ends meet in the house. And so we have to think about who is defining femininity here. What does that even mean?
Right, and especially, okay, as I get what you're saying, in terms of how it relates to this trope that some brothers don't want to deal with Black women because they're too masculine.
Yeah, like, what does that mean? You know what I'm saying? Like, and where is this idea of femininity coming from? Because we all have masculine tendencies and feminine tendencies, if you put it into this idea of gender and what that's supposed to look like. But then again, it filters into these gender roles that sometimes get in the way of your intimate relationships when you have these ideas of what a wife or what a husband is supposed to be or do, or what their tasks and roles are associated to that title. It becomes problematic.
I agree, and yeah, definitely problematic. I think, obviously, like everything else, it's certainly a Eurocentric. I believe the folks who are saying it's definitely a Eurocentric kind of idea of what femininity and even masculinity is. I think in the context of how I see brothers say it, it's around things like they don't feel needed. She tells us like she don't need certain things, or the whole idea of being difficult is wrapped up into that, and what they're saying, it's not feminine or whatever. Yeah.
I think, and these are the discourses that's going to always be difficult, because with this modern Black woman that has become so promoted today, and even kind of emphasized and marketed in pop culture, this Black woman that makes her own money and can do for herself, don't necessarily need a man unless it's for certain reasons. While I don't see that as being as pervasive as pop culture would make it seem to be, I think there's this idea that it's an image that exists within our psyche. There's these subliminal messages that just exist from dominant culture and how it's infused into our television shows, infused into music, infused into all of these different tropes. And you see it flamed and fueled around, sometimes associated with stuff like Black girl magic, and how this Black woman just kind of stands on this piece and just has everything that she has for, and then men responding to that image and that trope and saying, I'm gonna reject that. And so I think it's still it kind of stems from this idea of that a lot of brothers don't really know Black women in the way that they should know Black women. They don't have a really good, healthy understanding of what that looks like from a collective definition that's essentially defined by us. And so some of this is marketed from a Western kind of very Eurocentric perspective, but these images are associated deeply with how white women try to prop themselves up in society, how Black men try to prop themselves up in society. There's constant war between patriarchy and femininity that somehow gets infused into our conversations and our discourse with each other, and it's not even it doesn't apply. It doesn't filter over. It's not. But yet somehow we're still influenced on it because we see images in pop culture that tends to create these things. And so
that's such a good point.
As a Black woman, I grew up learning how to have some body armor. And my body armor means that I know how to be quick-witted with my tongue. I know how to fight. I know how to hoop, but like there's some protective factors. Like I remember my mom teaching me certain things on how to protect myself in the hood. We all generally speaking, got some type of upbringing that allowed us to have some protective gear when we go into this.
I did too.
So we can't be mad at each other for what our protective gear looks like because we have to wear it in certain places. But that is our work is like, okay, right, you got this protective gear, but you have to learn how to put it down when you're in a relationship and when you're interacting with your partner. A lot of us do bring our protective gear into our relationships and it becomes barriers to connection and intimacy. So it's not that it's all wrong, but you don't just stop there. There are solutions.
Right.
There are solutions to how we have to protect ourselves in this world and how we put these things down and we ease them away. We lean into vulnerability. We lean into trust. We lean into intimacy with each other. So I don't have to have my protective gear on when I'm just trying to interact with my husband. It's not needed there.
But some of this stuff is so embedded in an emotional, adverse way. Some of this thing has shaped who we are in such a respect that this is how we show up in our womanhood. This is how we show up in our manhood. And so we don't even know how to unpack that in our relationships. We don't know how to be intimate with someone without putting these armor down. And so like sometimes Black love become the proxy for a war between these things that's not even ours. Like we're just to love this Black man or love this Black woman, we have to fight up against these tropes that's not even ours. And so, and part of the work of Intimacy of Blackness is like, yo, we got to get to the root of this thing and understand how systems has impact and shaped how we view each other. We have to deconstruct some of these things and start to understand contextually what have we been through as a people, and then we have to reconstitute ourselves in our manhood and our womanhood based on definitions that comes from us in our peoplehood and our scholarship, and be able to say, all right, I can't show up with you with this strong armor of masculinity as a woman. And I can't show up to you as this aggressive, assertive man in this same format. Somehow I have to know how to emotionally regulate myself and be able to commune and connect with my wife because I love you. And it's vice versa with sisters and brothers too. So there's some of these things that, again, it boils down to how these ideas shape perceptions in pop culture and how these things are continuously influencing how we see each other.
Yeah, man. This is so good. And shout out to DIY Queen. I appreciate you, sister, for the super chat. There's a couple of questions here that I wanted to get to you guys before we end because we are a little bit at an hour. Is that okay?
Yes.
A couple of questions here. So here's one. Well, actually, I wanted to go back to Brother Tristan's point. This is hilarious to me. He says, I think we have to look at how white women tactfully engage in bedroom colonialism and interactions with African men, which is very different from how white women interact with African men. Tristan, I want to invite you to unpack that a little bit. I think I know what you're saying, but I would love to hear y'all reflections on that real quick, talking about the whole interracial piece. Y'all have a quick reflection. I think I know what he's saying.
That's complicated in itself because there's unique histories. There's different histories. Now, from what I'm reading from E. Franklin Fraser, white women have been engaging and courting with African men since the early colonial days. And so this is one of those untold histories that doesn't get elevated when we're hearing the history of how rapings has always been white men on African women. And so there is dynamic that has been existing for 400 years that has shown that white women has been just as aggressive and advantageous with engaging African women, African men in the process of the constructing America. And so while there were laws that were put in place to try to control the intermixing of British settlers and African enslaved folks in this colony, most of that was concocted to control white men from engaging with enslaved African women. But there was still this underlying piece that existed between white women and African men. And that there is this, I think Tristan is right in some respects in looking at this bedroom colonialism concept, because it has a lot to do with how different politics have been shaped around white supremacy, especially when we think about that what the central core of white supremacy exists is around the sacredness of the white woman and her relationship to the African man phallus. I mean, there is some history around that we can unpack with that, but I don't know if we have enough time. But he's right in some respects, because there's a different social dynamic of how they're viewed and how they're perceived, but yet they still have the same impact in terms of its impact of racism on us and how it really hurts the process of African people in this country.
Mm-hmm. He unpacked it a little bit more. He was saying white women, the aggressive fetishism, like the sex tourism. Oh. Hey, listen, y'all. I was shocked when I found out that was a thing. I had no clue. Mm-hmm. I found out on social media that white women would be going to the Caribbean and oh my God.
Yeah.
And I was like, really? I mean, but he even talks about obviously with African-American athletes where I think that part in Get Out, listen, Get Out was the truth, yo. Yeah, I'm like, he ain't playing with nobody, man. Yeah. Like, we've been knowing what it is. Right. But go ahead.
No, that I was thinking, because that's what I was saying. I'm like, I think he's talking about the bedroom.
Oh, okay.
And no, I mean, I don't have a lot of information other than, some things that I've seen in my peripheral vision around that. But there is absolutely an exoticism that exists with Black men, how big their parts are, what kind of ride white women can get from them. That's absolutely a thing. I would think that level of exoticism also exists with Black women and white men too, that there is just, I've heard white comedians who have Black wives or who have been with Black women talk about it. Like, Black women just got some extra sauce and it's just a little different in that department. But I can only comment on the peripheral. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's a question from the Black Mental Effect. Says, where do you start when it comes to learning to put your protective gear down?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I would say there are three. There we go. Okay, 3 approaches. So when in family work and in social services, we talk about a trauma-informed approach. And many of us who work in those fields know what a trauma-informed approach is. So it requires trauma-informed approaches to our connection, our intimacy. It requires healing-centered activities, and it also requires finding your power base. So when it comes to the healing, when it comes to the trauma, you have to know what happened to you. You have to know what your protective gear looks like. You got to know where you holding it at and how are you using it and how it's coming out in your relationship and how is it becoming a barrier to your intimacy. The healing centered piece is looking at, what do I need to heal? So that's an individual question for most of us. Like, what do I need in order to feel comfortable to put my protective gear down? Is this something internally that I need to work on? Is this something I need to work on directly with my partner? Is this something I need to work with a healer or a therapist on? What does it look like for me to heal, to feel comfortable enough to put this protective gear down and be vulnerable with my partner? And then the last piece is this power base is what is in my power what's in my capacity to do? What behaviors and activities can I change or can I do that allows me to put the healing in place to address my trauma? So those three things have to happen. And we're talking about a journey. This is a journey. It's a process. It's something that you're always going to be doing, but it creates a level of awareness in your mind and in your body that helps you be able to override those protective factors. Once we have that protective gear, it's kind of there. So we have to learn how to use it and how to let it be quiet in the background.
Yeah.
At the same
And
time.
some of this requires investigating our relationships with our own parents, our own mothers, and our fathers. It requires looking at how love was demonstrated between them, if it was there, how your relationship with your own father and mother was handled, and how you have a connection with that, how you're socialized in your community. And that also plays a big piece on how you grew up and what area you grew up in. And also requires us looking at, in terms of our protective gear, how do we define our ideas of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, essentially our own definition. And a lot of us in these relationships, we find out that there's significant development that needs to be done. One of the things that I've been really powerful and just appreciating is my cohort with Brother Amawale on Thursday evenings, because we're reading a book by Brother Baba Imhotep called the 21st Century African Man. And he's been elevating some of the literature of Amos Wilson in there. He's been pulling in, just echoing some of these scholars who have really been instrumental of just talking about the concept.
Yeah, that's a brother in Baltimore.
Yes, absolutely. And so one of the things that, I think I've been working with brothers on in their relationships is that when we're trying to build stronger bonds, and when we use the phrase that the listener asked in terms of putting our gear down, it requires us looking back and seeing what was the social construction of our manhood. What do we understand about being a man? And how does that man be a man in relationship to a real woman? And so what do we have to develop in that? What type of emotional regulation skills do we have to develop?
Emotional regulation
skills that we have to, because that's important, because brothers don't get the opportunity to talk about emotional development within our community, because in America, it's all about hard body. And it's like, that's not really helping us when it comes to being in love. It's important for us to be assertive. It's important for us to be warriors. It's important for us to be sharp and to be ready to go when it comes to defending our people. But we can't take that same type of weaponry against the woman who we are loving.
Okay, because put a pin in that real quick. Because there are women who want that gangster, there's women who want that thug, it's women who want that hard body. And if you ain't coming up hard body, you ain't man enough for me. And so this has to be connection with a woman who's doing the exact same work.
Right. But that's why Amos Wilson said that. He said Black manhood and even Black womanhood is a social construction that comes in the dialectical tension, a dialectical relationship between women and men. Like, that's the only way we can develop manhood and develop womanhood, is that it has to be in conversation. It has to be in expectation defining of both men and women in that process. Now, he also said that it takes men to raise up other men, but the construction of that has to be in a conversation between womanhood and manhood. So we have to push back against sisters who want that hard body thug, but then want him to be soft in the bedroom, because brothers can't transition like that.
No, it's not gonna be no transition.
We hard all the time, but we're not. And I think, and again, I'm relating that back to the gear piece. Oftentimes that comes from the inability for us to be able to feel and define emotional regulation, to be able to understand what we're feeling at that moment, what's appropriate to feel at that moment, process it, and then allow that to kind of release from ourselves to be able to be healthy and have a healthy functioning relationship with our woman.
Absolutely.
Man, this has been gold, man. Like, this is so important. I'm actually gonna go back and watch this myself. Like, I don't usually go back and watch all myself. I'm gonna go back and watch this because I know I'm gonna hear something that I didn't hear the first time. So I want to ask one final question because for me, this irks me when people say this. Black people, of course. So it's related to the whole interracial dating, marriage, and thing. And people say love is love. How would you?
Love.
I just would love your response to that in the
Mm.
context of everything that we're talking about here.
we
There's no,
Honestly.
you can go first.
I just, we believe that Black love is Black power. And as Black Family Blueprint, we are
Ooh-wee.
about the sustenance and the longevity of the collective Black family.
Mhm.
And like that is the bottom line. So you're right. Love is love, and love is the easiest thing to do. Sex is even the easiest thing to do. Those two things are easy. So yeah, love is love. You can go love everybody. But that has nothing to do with our peoplehood and our building. We know that our coupling is directly related to our power base as a people. We know that positive marriages, long lasting marriages are directly connected to who we are as a people and our longevity. And so that's that. Love is love. That's right. But that ain't got nothing to do with Black power. And we're about building Black power. And for Black power, it requires Black love.
Yeah. I think Europeans and American Westerners have gotten obsessed with love and this whole romanticization about love, because other parts of the world, especially in the continent of Africa and some of the descendancies that we come from, love is not the absolute premises that makes a couple and a family and a village of people come together. We're not obsessed with love like that. There's more to the construction of a man and a woman and a family being able to come together and be in connection with each other. And so I think there's an obsession with love. There's a romanticization in this country around love. And I think it's influenced kind of like the social politics of how people involve with each other, intergroup with each other in terms of their peace. And love is, especially in America, is always going to be shaped and influenced by the doctrine of white supremacy. Yes. So when we go back to talk about those white women going to the Caribbeans, that eroticism and exoticism that they experience, and that's not love. And when they want to bring that brother home or bring that sister home, that has a lot to do with more their fascination with some other pieces than it do with love. And they're trying to associate that with love because the good novel or the good movie that they're referencing in their subconscious tells them, I want to love him for that piece. But the deeper pieces around this is that, look, love is overly fantasized. There's a fetish around that. Once you get beyond that whole euphoric state of what we call love and get into the real process of intimacy, that's when you start to realize, whoa, is love really, love is really love. And we find out that's not the case. Statistically, that's not the case. It definitely shows that love is not love like that.
Right. So. And there's also, so I've just, in some like Facebook groups and stuff, there's been some Black women who have married white men who's struggling.
Yeah,
they struggling with their white men. They're not up to par with what they expected out of being married to. So marriages ain't lasting, period. And that's why we're like, this is not about love. We don't really preface our work in saying that it's Black love. That is why we call it Black intimacy. Because it's easy to love.
Yeah.
It's too easy almost.
It's too easy. And we fall in love with it. One of the things that y'all talked about, you and Sister Niara talked about, was that there isn't a lot of images around on TV that shows Black love.
And that's intentional.
It's very intentional with that. On the same token, there's this kind of socio-cultural push to promote Black love in the last 15, 20 years, especially after this advent of Barack and Michelle being at the highest office of Western, capitalism, and how their so-called relationship and connection with each other just exhumed this beautiful Black love. But we don't know what happens in the White House.
We do not know.
And based on some of the images that we've seen with the Huxtables, we don't know what happens when the cameras goes off. Love Jones gave us this crazy image of this beautiful love, and don't get me wrong, I really appreciated Love Jones. It's a decent movie.
I like that movie.
When we look at The Gentleman, when we look at Best Man, when we look at some of these movies that have done this work around promoting this perceived Black love, you don't see the depictions of what happens after that. When the euphoria comes down, when there's complications between his sister's armor, when he's been held accountable to his manhood, when she's been expected from her womanhood, when things get complicated from aging, when the sex really isn't always there, that stuff takes intimacy, because love don't carry on, and love is going to be fleeting, you know. And when it comes to that,
why marriages in America don't really
work.
Last.
Yeah, they don't last because they're banking on this love is love. And I think to some extent, you know, and even though love is love in terms of the interracial piece, I think we've also fetishized this whole Black love thing because it's so popular in its form.
Or this power couple.
Yeah, this power couple.
But
the functionality is important. And so this love is love thing, I think that's a hoax to some extent. It's a deep hoax because it's kind of like a cultural phrase to be able to say, like, you know, it's just like saying I'm colorblind, I should be able to love anybody, and I, you know, it's like I can cross the boundaries and just, you know, do what I want to do and love who I want to do. But the reality is that no, your love is influenced by your ethnicity. It's influenced by your heritage. It's influenced by your social predicament economically. It's influenced by your politics. Your love, understanding, and orientation is influenced by a lot of different frame of references that you don't even pay attention to.
It's subtle.
And it shows up when those complications come through. And that's why interracial marriages is always going to have some complications with that. And Richard Pryor was really good at elevating that in his comedy. It's a Black thing, woman, you know, you wouldn't understand. And he'll talk about his white woman like, yeah, I guess I don't understand, because he knew that when it came to those love is love thing, that didn't fly when it came to some of the challenges that he had to go through as a Black man and what she was privileged as a white woman.
That's so real. And that's funny you bring up the statistics, because I read recently, and I can't remember where I read it, but apparently Black men and white women have some of the highest divorce rate. I don't know if y'all had heard that, but I read that somewhere, like, interesting.
Wow.
But it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
It says something.
It says something.
It says something, doesn't it?
Listen,
it says something.
It does. I always, when I hear stats and I hear some of the research, I always try to pick it apart to see what's the efficacy, what's the validity of the sampling and all of that stuff. But I think we can imagine some social predicaments and circumstances where there's some truth and reality to those numbers. There's some qualitative connections to that quantitative data. And if Black men and white women have some of the highest divorce rates, I think we could also go into how many Black men actually remarry after that divorce rates too. So I think it does speak to this kind of love is love thing. Might be a myth. It might be mythical in that sense.
Our people got sayings for that, like the grass ain't always greener on the other side, or all that glitters ain't gold. You know, we got some wisdom behind. Got some wisdom behind that. You know, the proof is definitely in the numbers. It's like, what did you think it was going to be?
What did you think?
To the other side,
right,
you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The imagery of whiteness in this country has influenced a lot of our perceptions of these things. And so we really think that, I mean, a lot of brothers, you know, in the 70s and the 80s was like, man, I'm going to give me a white woman to try to economically come up. I found some heartache on the other side of those decisions. And so, you know, love ain't love like that. Love is not, it's kind of mythical. It doesn't have a strong foundation to stand on all the time. There's some deeper work around that.
That's right.
That's real. That's real. Man, this has been one of the most enjoyable broadcasts that I've ever had. And I think really, honestly, it's probably the most important one I've done. Like I said, I'm going to go back and watch this. And I certainly encourage all of the viewers to really share this widely, obviously with like-minded people who you know will get a lot out of this. And I just want you all to know you all are always welcome back on this platform. And you all
Thank you.
Yeah, like if y'all are gonna be writing any books or writing anything or just anything, like there's a new concept you guys are working on. This subject, I don't think I say it enough. It's so important to me because I know what Sister Io said is real. Like that, that literally is the foundation of Black power. There is no Black power, and like I say that as a Pan Africanist because I started looking around, like, to be honest, like our Pan African community, and we got some fucked up ass relationships.
Yep.
Ain't staying married. Like it's like everybody else. And we so Black power. How we so about Black power, but we ain't loving each other where it matters.
That's the thing.
That's right.
That is the thing. And when you talk about activism, social action, that type of work, again, back to the patriarchy, it has really been in the house of Black men to do that work. And oftentimes families are being left.
Mm-hmm.
Women and children are being left.
Mm-hmm.
And there is not really a cohesion in terms of what it looks like to stand on the front line, what it looks like to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that it starts at home. You cannot leave your house to go into the community.
Period.
To go
How
do
you building a nation and you can't even build your own home?
You
bruh?
can't do it.
There you go.
You can't do it.
There you
Right.
go.
Serious.
There you go.
You can't.
There
That's
you
the
go.
basis of Black Family Blueprint, or having a blueprint, not the blueprint, but a blueprint for Black families. Is like, yo, what you do at home matters in this whole community. What happens in your house, what happens between you and your spouse, what happens between you and your children sets the tone for what our communities look like, even for what our social activism looks like. Like, it sets the tone for these things. But if we ain't right, you ain't building no nation.
That's right. That's
if your
right.
house ain't,
That's right.
you can't do it.
It is the power base. Like you influence a political framework from two healthy Black couples being able to connect on a deeper way. You influence the economy of your people by two Black couples being able to unite and be intimate with each other. You influence the sociology of your community by two Black couples being able to show up healthy in a functioning way. If you can't get this right, then you're undermining the fabric of any peoplehood making, any liberation movement, you're going against the work. You have to get this right first.
Counterproductive to the movement if you can't get it right at home.
That's right.
And I it's so real. People look at me a little weird sometimes, like when I bring that up, but I'm just like, how you building? Why you so external facing? You know what I mean? You building a nation, and you not married to a Black woman or Black man.
Yeah,
right.
That's
like how.
Yeah, that's major. That's deep. Some of the deepest commitments you can do to helping your people and moving us towards liberation is to love another person from your own ethnicity, your heritage, your experience, and your Africanness. That's essential. That who you lay on the bed and you're there next to your pillow influences your politics.
Yep.
We have to stop thinking that somehow we can be this pro-Black, but we don't have pro-Black in the bed with us. Like that's just the real of this thing. Like, that's the most deepest, intimate way that you are validating the liberation of your people is who you choose to love.
And a white woman who's down for the movement, who might throw a hit rap on and spit a little slang to you, ain't gonna do it.
Hilarious. That's real. No, that's real. Yeah, no, this has been amazing, y'all. So Sister, the Black Mental Effect want to know, do y'all have social media handles that they can follow?
Oh, we are at Black Family Blueprint on Facebook. That's a muscle we gotta flex.
Yeah.
We have not been flexing our social media muscle, but we are on Facebook at Black Family Blueprint.
Yeah, I put the website. I put the website in the comments too.
I'll put mine in there at Kanjari. I don't do a whole lot with it on Gram and Twitter. I might tap in every once in a while. That's actually how I came across Brother Amawale. It's through Twitter. And I found him on the debate that him and Logic Supreme did on your show last year.
It was hilarious, wasn't it? It was a surgical takedown, wasn't it?
It was surgical. It was strategic.
Surgical.
Brother
Omawale, thorough.
Ever since then, I've been taking notes from this brother. I'm like, man, I got to get the courage to reach out to this brother. Yeah. So I do interact with Twitter from time to time, but just not enough. But we do have to build that muscle out a little bit. So our website and our Facebook page is one of the best ways to interact with us on social media.
Awesome. This has been great, y'all. Like I said, it's like definitely, one of the most important conversations I've had on this channel thus far. And again, I want to welcome you all back anytime, because I'm always down to have this conversation.
Thank you so
Seriously.
much.
Absolutely.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's a deeper prognosis around what the work looks like in building intimacy. And I love to come back and just kind of converse with you on that, what that looks like. Because
That sounds like a plan to me.
yeah, is what does
Yeah.
the prescription look like, y'all? And again, this is just one of many, but we do work with Black couples and coach them every day. And we're using this recipe to really help Black men, Black women really build stronger bonds with each other, save our people.
Yes, indeed.
One couple at a time.
That's right.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's it tonight, you all. Please join us again every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. We will see y'all next week. Peace and love, everybody.